So I'm just going to start with a quick note for our live stream viewers. Please, if you have any questions during or after, write them all in the chat, and at the end we're going to answer all of them. So, hello everybody in the audience, but also on our live stream. We're so thrilled to welcome you to today's masterclass. This event is a part of FilmEU former experts on air, and we are very happy that FilmEU is able to host this for the first time ever. We're honored to introduce you to our guest, Wouter Jansen. He accepted our invitation to tell you something about festival strategies and much, much more. Wouter Jansen is a Vienna-based sales agent and CEO of Square Eyes, company focusing on festival distribution. He represents striking short as well as feature films, and he closely works with creators on the festival journey of their films. Okay, now enough from me. Wouter Jansen is going to tell you better. There's going to be a Q&A, and because of people on the live stream, please, if you have any questions, raise your hand and you're going to get a microphone. So please speak to the microphone so people online can hear you well. Thank you very much. And now enjoy.
Thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Wouter. I run a company called Square Eyes. And within the company, I work with feature films, I work with short films, but I'll try to really focus on the short film part as much as possible. During the talk, I'll a couple of times make sort of break in case you have any questions, because maybe it's a bit much. So for the people in the room, you can just questions in the beginning, otherwise we keep the questions till the end. So, I'm Wouter in the company called Square Eyes. If I have to say what I do, I would say that I'm a sales agent, but when it comes to short films, it's a little bit different, also because of the type of taste that I have in films. So when it comes to short films, I usually say that I do festival distribution, because I'm not super interested in the very commercial part, which is like selling films. So I really try to think of films as much as possible more from like a festival perspective. And this is also because I have a background in festival programming. So I started off in the film industry in 2018 when I worked for a short film festival in the Netherlands called Go Short Film Festival. I worked there for the first 10 editions of the festival as head of programming. And then through that job, I kind of rolled into what I'm doing now. So I would be traveling. Back then, I was still based in the Netherlands, and I would be traveling to, for instance, the graduation screening of the Film Academy in Amsterdam. I would see student films there, but then at that point, I would never see those films outside of the Netherlands playing in festivals. So at that point, I thought like, okay, maybe this is something I can help out with, getting these films out into the world. So this was in 2011. So back then I was sitting together with a filmmaker at my kitchen table, burning DVDs, filling out forms by hand, writing envelopes. So everything has become a bit easier nowadays with everything being digital. But then again, there's like more and more festivals popping up. So I think right now it's easier, but it's also easier to drown into all the festivals that are out there. So the biggest part of my job, I would say, is really trying to help out figuring out what are the festivals that are interesting for you and which are festivals that are maybe not so important. So yeah, so in 2012, I started a company called Some Shots, which is kind of the company that it's now just under a different name. We started doing feature films. I thought people will understand at one point that some shorts also does feature films. But after 5 years of getting the question, oh, you only do short films, right? I thought like, okay, maybe I should change the company name. So then it became Square Eyes in 2020. So in 2020, we really launched with the idea that we're going to do feature films. So we launched it in January 2020. Then in March, everything went into full lockdown. So it was not the ideal moment to start a company for more challenging films. But here we are. Um, and so, yeah, as I said before, with the short films, we really focus on getting them out to festivals. So I'm not so much doing like sales to television, sales to VOD platforms, things like this. I'm usually helping out with it, but in some cases, we also work together with somebody who really does that. With the feature films, we do everything. So we do the sales to television, VOD platforms, to cinemas. But that's also because there's more money in festivals in feature films as opposed to short films. Like with short films, if you play at a festival, usually you don't get any money. With feature films, you do get money. So because of that, for sales agents, it's more interesting to do the festival part as well. While for short films, it just costs a lot of money. So with the short films, um, we really decided to focus fully on that festival part. So these are some of the films that we've worked with in the past couple of years. It's not super up to date. So, for instance, last year we worked with a Slovak folk production, I'm Not Everything I Want to Be, a feature documentary, which did quite well. So every year we work with around 15 short films and around six feature films. This is somewhat of an imaginary number uh, that we set, but in the past year, it actually usually came down that we worked with around 11 or 12 short films and around five feature films. And the idea of the company is really that we don't want to work with too many films. We just want to have like a super tight, really strong catalog so that that we can have a really strong relationship with festivals because and with distributors because they know um, the types of films that we work with, the types of the quality of the films that we have, so that they kind of trust what we're doing. With the short films, I would say it's a bit more all over the place. So we have some films that are quite narrative, really accessible, and also very experimental ones. While with the feature films, we really decided to really go into this niche of more challenging films. And if I say challenging, I mean from a market perspective. So a film like I'm Not Everything I Want to Be, for me, is my most commercial film. But as soon as I talk to a distributor and I'm like, oh, it's a film with only photographs, no moving image, black and white, about a photographer that you never heard of, then it's quite a difficult pitch. While every time somebody sees it, they immediately fall in love with it. So it's really that um, I think also the market is maybe a bit, uh, they don't really dare to go for more challenging films, I think. But so we really go for those more outdoor films in that field. Um, yeah. So to the point. Whenever we work with a film, so when we take on a film, we have a discussion first with the film team. And the basis of that discussion is two questions that we ask. So the first one is what type of film do we have? This can be super basic. So what is the length of the film? What is the genre of the film? Who's the audience? And with that, you already kind of know a little bit the basics. So if you have a film that's 15 minutes, you know that you could aim for Cannes. If it's 16 minutes, you know that you're not eligible for main competition in Cannes. So then you already know that's not an option. If it's a very accessible, friendly film, then maybe going for a festival like Berlinale, which is slightly more experimental, is not something you want to try. Uh, if you have a film that's from Eastern Europe, then suddenly there's a whole string of festival that it opens up that you can aim for. Maybe also for a premiere, a festival like Sarajevo suddenly becomes more interesting. So all of this kind of feeds into what we can do with the festival life of the film. But then also a question is like, what is the quality of the film? And this is a bit more of a tricky one because it's super subjective. So I mean, when I was programming, I would watch a bit more than 1,000 short films each year. So at one point, you kind of get an idea of what is out there, and if you see a film, you understand like how it falls within what is out there at the moment, or maybe how it compares to films from the previous years. I try to really be up to date on what plays at the big festival, so I know like the films that played at Cannes in the selection every year. So when I see a film, I'm also trying to judge like, okay, is this a film that I think we have a shot at Cannes? Um, Overall, I think I'm kind of okay with estimating this, but a couple of years ago, I remember that in October, I saw a film. I was like, okay, it's nice, but I don't think it will go to a really big festival. Then a couple of months later, it was announced that it was selected in the main competition in Cannes. Then a month later, it was announced that it won the Palme d'Or in Cannes. So at that point, I also wrote the director like, okay, I was really wrong on this one. But so it's quite difficult to estimate, but I always try to be as realistic as possible with the expectations, what we can do with the film. Um, and then the next question is, what are my goals? So if you necessarily say, I want to be in an A-list festival, we're going to try it. If you say, I really want to play in Asia, then that can be a strategy that you have. Maybe you want to win an Oscar. Maybe you want to win a student Oscar. You can do certain things to try to achieve that. Maybe you want to be on television. Back in the day, maybe you want to be a Vimeo staff pick. All of this can be something you try to keep in mind um, when doing the festival strategy. In some countries in Europe, also certain festivals give you access to funding. So that means that maybe we prioritize certain festivals. It can also be a thing that you decide early on, okay, my goal is that I want to work with a sales agent. My goal is that I want to work with somebody doing the festivals for me. So that's then something you can try to already achieve earlier on so that you already contact sales agents in an earlier stage, things like this. Um, so these two questions for me really kind of form the basis of everything um, that we do after and which we base the whole festival strategy on. So before I go to the next part of the festival strategy, maybe it's good to talk a little bit about how we actually find our films. So as I said, with short films, we work with around 15 short films a year. Um, a big part of these 15 films are films we that directors that we know, that we've worked with in the past, that we've seen previous films of, and that we were in touch with, producers that we maybe have met along the way. And then a small part of that is also people that just email us and send us a film. Um, we get around 3 films a day sent to us. I think we pick up 1 or 2 per year from those films that are sent to us. So the reality is that we don't find a lot of films that way, but in the end, we do watch all of them. But yeah, it's usually just more like, for instance, we just got on board with a film that got sent to us, but then it's a film team that I already knew from their previous work. So for me, it doesn't really count as like just somebody who emails me a film. But also, in 2020, we won the Palme d'Or in Cannes with the Egyptian film I'm Afraid to Forget Your Face. That was a director I'd never heard of that just sent me an email. So it's like it can really, um, in the end, we do find projects that way, but mostly it's that we're quite active in watching films and following people that we're interested in. Um, if the film is already premiered, we're not really considering it anymore. So it's really, we want to be on board from the beginning. I think this year we just picked up a film in Berlin that won the Golden Bear for Best Short Film. That was, for instance, a film that we saw at the premiere. I fell in love with it. We met with them, and then 2 days later they won the Palme d'Or of the Golden Bear, and then we came on board after. But that's quite an exception. Usually, it's really that we try to be on board beforehand, and this is also so that we can help out as much as possible with thinking about like, okay, what can you do with the festivals from the beginning on? Um, yeah, and then a last thing is also that we also always scout at festivals. So I look at the whole lineup of Berlinale, of Cannes, of Locarno, of Venice, of festivals where there's world premieres, and then we try to watch the films beforehand. And another thing is that we get a lot of recommendations. So people that I know at big festivals that say, okay, we didn't select these films, but maybe you should look at them. People from film institutes, people from schools, other directors that I've worked with. Like we get a lot of recommendations, and actually that's also quite a big way of how we find author. So premieres. I think when it comes to festival strategy, actually the biggest strategic point, which is maybe the most difficult point, is the premieres. And that's because it's a waiting game. So you have to be the most patient, I think, around the premiere. And it's also the most frustrating part. I hate this part because you have a film that you love and you don't get any selections and you're constantly wondering, okay, maybe I made a mistake, maybe the film is not good, maybe I saw something wrong in it. Um, so the premiere is uh, the the first screenings that you have of your film. So you have the world premiere, that's the first ever screening, international premiere, the first ever screening outside the country of production, and then all the national premieres. So that's all the screenings afterwards, where it's the first time screening in a country. Um, for feature films, almost every festival wants to have one of those national premieres. With short films, doesn't really matter. But the world and the international premiere are very important because all the big festivals want to have a world premiere, but most of them are also still able to take just the international premiere. But if you look at the programs, almost all the films there are world premieres. So if you have a film that's from here and you premiere at Berlinale, that's your world premiere, but also your international premiere at the same time. In some cases, you can premiere, for instance, you would premiere here at Fabio Fest and then you would go to Cannes. That means that you have your world premiere here and then you have your international premiere in Cannes. It's possible, but it's much more uh, difficult. So, what to do with this first screening? That's always a discussion that I have with the directors in the beginning. Like, what do we want to aim for? How quickly do you want to have the film out into the world? Are you okay with waiting a long time? So I'll show an example where we, for instance, decided that we were going to wait a full year. So that meant that the film is finished, and then in that case, we waited a year before the film showed for the first time. Uh, Sometimes we also decide, okay, we're just going to get it out as soon as possible. So if I would start with a film now, that would mean maybe we try Cannes, and then after that, we just send it out into the world. So this is really a discussion that I try to have very early on so that we don't make any mistakes in that. So when I started out, we, for instance, decided, okay, we want to wait for that. We didn't get into this big festival, and then we just started sending it everywhere. And then suddenly the deadline of Berlinale came closer. And then we were like, okay, maybe we can just try Berlinale. But then suddenly we started getting selections from those smaller festivals that we submitted to. And then you have to make the decision, okay, am I now giving my world premiere to these smaller festivals, or I'm going to wait a bit longer to potentially get a no from that festival 2 months later and then have nothing. So right now we try to be super clear in like this is the timeline that we're waiting for this premiere. We don't do anything else. And so for people besides me and the film team, this film doesn't exist. So if we would premiere a year later, that's the moment that the film is finished and nobody knew about the film before. Going into this, you have to be aware that getting into these, when I talk about A-list festivals, it's festivals like Sundance, like Berlin, like Venice, like Cannes. Getting into those festivals, even if your film is amazing, is impossible. So a festival like Sundance gets 10,000 films. They select 30 non-American short films. I think even a bit less. Berlinale gets around 6,000 short films. This year they only selected 20 short films. Clermont-Ferrand, the biggest short film festival in the world, has a relatively big selection, 140 films. They also get 10,000 films. So if you do the math, the chance of getting into one of those festivals is just super small. So when you start doing this waiting game for a big premiere, you always have to know that the chances of getting in there will be small. So I say this more to kind of like to manage the expectations because it's always difficult. I've had films that went to like 200 festivals, but we didn't manage to get that big festival in the beginning. But as soon as we started sending it out to smaller festivals, everybody fell in love with the film. So it's for a short film, it's not make or break if you're in one of those big festivals or not. But yeah, so the chances are just small. So to give an example, a couple of years ago, I worked with a film called The End of Suffering. It's a Greek short film. I think you all got the link to watch films online. This one is in there. So Jackie is a Greek director. After graduation, she made a film called Aleppo, which premiered at Locarno Film Festival. Then she did a short film after that called Hiwa. That was the first time we worked together. That was a short film that premiered at Berlinale. Then she did a short film called Hector Malot, Last Day of the Year, premiered in Cannes, Semaine de la Critique, won Cannes, Semaine de la Critique. So the film that I worked on, The End of Suffering, was her last short film that she made while editing her feature film, Moon 666. And she was kind of not in a hurry. She knew I won't be able to travel with this film. She said, I really want to go for Venice because I've never been to Venice. Uh, so we decided to be very selective in where we would send the film. So at that time, we didn't send it, for instance, to Locarno because she was like, oh, I think Locarno would select the film. So I don't want to risk it because I really want to go to Venice. And the film has a lot of red in it. So in her mind, it was the perfect film for Venice. So our main goal was Venice. To give a little bit of an idea, I'll play the trailer of the film. I love the trailer. It doesn't say anything about the film. Um, so, uh, so the End of Suffering short film. I think it's like 15 minutes. It's probably the most experimental of Jackie's work. So as I said, we said the film was finished in June 2019, and our aim was Venice. Then we didn't get into Venice. We didn't try Locarno. We didn't try Toronto. So then we tried Berlinale in February. We didn't try Rotterdam because Shaki also said, I think Rotterdam would select the film, so I don't want to try it. Didn't get into Rotterdam, into Berlinale. Then we tried Cannes. We didn't get into Cannes. And then a year later, we tried Locarno, and Locarno selected the film. So the film is a year old, but because nobody knew about this film, like we weren't talking to people about this film, the moment that we got the selection of Locarno, we said, okay, now the film is finished. So it's August 2020 film. But because we already did this beforehand, I had to talk like, okay, how long are we going to wait? And we decided, okay, we start in June and we're going to wait a full year with all the big festivals. So a year later, we would try Locarno and Toronto. So I already knew at that point, okay, after the dates of Toronto, so that's like in September, I know that we're not going to wait for any big premiere anymore. So I could immediately start submitting the film to all the smaller festivals that would happen after Toronto already months before, because I knew at that point, even if we don't get into any of the big festivals, this is the moment the film can get out there. So before we got the selection of Locarno confirmed, I already got 5 selections of smaller festivals, but all of those festivals would be after Locarno. So I knew that we can just say yes to it because it wouldn't risk our strategy that we had determined um, for the film. So this is a film where actually we got a lot of rejections, and like it also felt like, okay, nobody's interested in the film. But actually, what it came down to is that 5 festivals didn't select the film until we got Locarno. And then we ended up, I think the film played at like around 70 festivals, something like that. Uh, so, yeah. So then with a short film, I usually say that you have a year and a half, so 18 months to go to festivals. In that period, your film is still kind of new enough for main competitions or festivals. Competitions are really like an overview of the current state of short film. So that's why most festivals have this, like your film can't be older than 1 year, or a year and a half. So the clock starts ticking from the moment that your film premieres. So the moment we say, okay, now it's an August 2020 film, that's the moment the clock starts ticking. So if we would have said in June 2019, oh, Jacqueline has a new film, we would already put the trailer out there. Your film, by the time it premieres, is already old. So that's why I'm trying to be very kind of exclusive when we're trying this, so that you can, when you launch it, that's the moment the film uh, is finished. Another example where it was a bit different uh, is a German-Ukrainian film that we worked with from Milas Litenko and Daniel Asadi-Fazi. It's called Waking Up in Silence, which we premiered 2 years ago. They just had a new short film which premiered at Berlinale, uh, which was like an observational documentary that was shot in Germany at a former Wehrmacht kaserne, where at that point Ukrainian families were living, and they shot a documentary around some of the children. So again, I'll show a trailer to give an impression of the film. Yeah, so Waking Up in Silence, I think it was the most straightforward documentary that they did. It's quite artistic in the way of that there's not a lot of, like, it's really observational and small, poetic. But because it only concerns young characters, we decided, okay, let's try Berlinale Generation. They had never played in Berlinale before. So when we started working with the film, that was in September, I think, Berlinale was the first festival we aimed for. Then we got selected in Berlinale. But so in this case, because it's a German film, that meant that our world premiere was actually also just the national premiere. So we still had the international premiere. So then after that festival, we were talking to Vision de Real, which is a documentary festival in Nyon, Switzerland in April, which is a more artistic, more experimental in some ways documentary festival where they had played before. So then we decided we got selected there, so we could do. We kind of had 2 major festivals. We had the world premiere at a major festival in Berlin, and then we had the documentary festival as the international premiere. And what it also did is that kind of gave 2 different kind of stamps on the film. So Berlinale really positioned the film as a documentary for young audiences. So it opened up this whole possibility of going to more young audience festival, to youth festivals. And then when we went to Nyon, suddenly we got this like artistic documentary stamp on it, and suddenly more experimental festivals were also looking at the film. So the two film festivals really gave quite a different label to what the film was and opened up these different routes that we could then go to with the film. Uh, it ended up winning Berlinale. I think I saw yesterday that by now I think we played at 130 festivals, and so the new film just premiered at Berlinale, the main short film competition, and again we were lucky to also get selected in Vision Real. So we're again doing this kind of combination um, with the film. Are there any questions so far? Then I continue. Um, yeah, so make a strategy. So this whole first part with the premieres, I would say, is quite easy to do for you, even if you don't know too much of festivals. Like the big festivals, it's just not that many. So it's like max 10 festivals or something like that. Um, so deciding what you want to aim for with a premiere, that's something you can do yourself. I think nowadays the biggest part of the strategy is trying to figure out what do you do after that. I think all of you have been on Film Freeway. If you log in at any given time, there's more than 5,000 festivals that are open. I think there's 13,000 festivals on that platform. Whenever we do a strategy for a film, we usually make a list of around 150 festivals that we think are interesting. So trying to understand um, what festivals are worthwhile is probably the most difficult. So to give an idea, um, this is the document we are working in. So me and my colleagues, we have a Google form with all the films that we're working with, and then the different festivals that are out there, the length that they select, the different thematics. These are all the old films we worked with. Um, and then in this, we really do a whole strategy. So like which films are we going to submit? Maybe some that we will submit to a year later. So I think at the moment we have like a list of around 3,500 festivals. This is 14 years of work. The but as I said, we only submit to around 150 films festivals when we work with a film. So even though I have quite a big list, we don't submit to most of them. It's more for us to keep track. But yeah, making those decisions, I think, is the most difficult thing to do. Uh, for us, it really depends on kind of these decisions that I said in the beginning. So what do you want to aim for? But a big part of that nowadays is also what is your budget? If you have no money, then like a lot less is possible because almost every festival nowadays asks for an entry fee. Uh, um, Also, yeah, I think like probably that's the most difficult thing, like budget nowadays, like how to manage that. And it's also so difficult to understand sometimes. Sometimes I see a festival that I feel is good, but then I kind of see through it. But I think as a director, it's quite difficult to know. So like you have the New York Film Festival, which is the important New York festival. And then you have New York Independent Film Festival, which maybe takes place in somebody's garage. But they both ask the same amount of money for the entry fee. So it's sometimes quite difficult um, to understand. So I think this is the biggest part nowadays of making a strategy. How I really started out with making strategies is I was just looking for lists, uh, really dumb lists that I just Googled the best short film festivals in the world. Uh, but also, for instance, the list of the Oscar qualifying festivals. A lot of these festivals are really expensive, but for outside of America, there's quite a lot of like strong short film festivals on there. Nowadays, the European Film Awards also has a list of around 25 festivals. So that's a good starting point. Um, but probably my most favorite way to do it is just to copy paste other films. So one of the first films we started out with was a human rights short documentary, and I would just think like, okay, what was the biggest documentary in the past 2 years that had a similar theme? And then I would just look at what were the festivals where this film played at, and I would copy paste it. Maybe you want to look at like what is the most successful film for my film school in the past years, and you just use that as a basis. So for me, uh, kind of using what other people have done or finding these lists, that's I think the easiest way to get an understanding of like what are quality festivals, or just to ask people for advice. Uh, Whenever I'm submitting, I always recommend to people to at least try to submit to around 30 to 50 festivals. Um, the most difficult part of all of this is that a lot of people stop submitting at one point, um, but you really have to submit a lot to get selection. So, our most successful film that we had 350 festivals. That film we also submitted to 700 festivals. So it really means that like our most successful film still got rejected every like 50% of all submissions. Most of our films actually get rejected like 80% of all submissions. So and then I'm talking about one of the most successful films that year. So you really have to be prepared to get a lot of rejections and to kind of at least do like a minimal amount of work to understand if your film is working or not. Like I said before, when we're only trying the A-list festivals, sometimes it feels that nobody's interested, but in the end, almost nobody saw the film. So you really have to kind of do quite a bit of work, uh, yeah, to know if your film is working or not. Um, Question? Yeah, there's some cube coming your way. Good, bro. The mic is in there.
This is my.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. Yeah, just one question about the acquisitions because I just had in mind that if you prefer to get the film link to watch and to decide about the film, if it's the picture locked or work in progress or when it's already finished.
All of the above. Like it doesn't really matter. For me, it's just like if you say that this is a version that's communicating what the film is, then it's fine for me. Sometimes I see a film and I see that the sound design will completely change it, or like VFX is a big part, then I would suggest maybe to wait a bit longer. Um, but yeah, for me, like around rough cut, I usually can already see if it would be something that could work for us. Like in worst case, we say, okay, maybe come back to us when you have a bit more advanced version. But I think that's like it's rough cut is fine. Yeah.
And is it the same with the festivals? Also submitting to festivals to submit it when it's already almost finished, or would you recommend to submit when it's really finished?
Yeah. So I think submitting a work in progress is really something you should only do for the big festivals. Like almost all the festivals that don't need this premiere, they don't care. So you can wait a year to just send them the finished film. Like there's no reason. Like when I worked at Go Short, some people would send us a rough cut, and I would just be like, we could have just waited. Next year we would still be interested in the film. So there's not really a reason to rush for us. Um, but if, for instance, okay, the Cannes deadline was last Friday, and you know that you will be close to finishing around that time, then I always ask, like, okay, do you think you would want to wait a full year to try Cannes next year? Probably you already want to have the film out there by then, so then you can just as well submit a work in progress version. So if it's like kind of, okay, if I don't submit this work in progress, I wouldn't submit the film at all, also not next year, then I would just submit the work in progress version. But yeah, I mean, like with Venice, with Berlin, you pay like 70 euros. So then it's a bit like, okay, are you sure? Like last year, I worked with a film that submitted a rough cut to a festival where the last 5 minutes were a black screen, and in subtitles it says this is going to happen, but he just didn't have the sequence yet. So then it was also like, okay, like nobody's going to select. Like it doesn't make any sense to be showing this to people. We had a feature film that we were sending to Cannes that, like, I don't think we would have been able to finish if we would get selected. So that's also the question. Will you be able to finish before the festival happens? So like if you submit to Cannes now, it means that you will need to deliver a finished version a month and a half from now if you get selected. So if you know that you won't be able to do that, don't submit. So there's a lot of these questions, but for me with short films, it's a bit like if you know that you won't be submitting next year, then you can submit a work in progress, but only do it for the big A-list festivals. For all the other festivals, I would really suggest just submit the version when it's finished and don't rush.
Thank you.
And you can also always have a conversation with the festival. So with a lot of festivals, if I know, okay, this is a film that's coming up, but we won't make it, then I just have the discussion, is it okay if we send it 2 weeks later? So then they already they know this film is coming. I have a deadline extension and we know that we can submit it a bit later. So that's if you really want to aim for a certain festival, but you know you won't be able to make the deadline, like they won't watch everything the week after the deadline. So getting like 1 week, 2 weeks extensions is usually possible. So that's also good when I talk about like what are your goals. If you know I want to aim for this festival, then you can already in an early stage decide, okay, if the deadline for Venice is 1st of June, then I need to have an English subtitled copy the 1st of June. If I won't make that, when would I be able to make it? And maybe you can already have that conversation with Venice to ask, hey, can I submit it a bit later? So yeah, so like it's quite flexible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No?
Okay. So yeah, be prepared. So this is like as soon as you made this, like making the strategy is also part of it. It's more about like try to get everything set up. So whenever we start working with a film, we try to have everything already prepared before we have the first selection. So the screening copies, all the text, but also, for instance, try to have some visibility as a director online. I don't know how often I'm scouting for films. So like I'm looking at all the new films that are selected in Cannes, and I'm not able to find anybody related to the film. So even just having like a website with purely your email address and a link to IMDb or something can already be useful. But it's so often that I end up texting somebody through Vimeo chat, uh, which doesn't make any sense. But like really try to have some online presence so that people can find you if they're interested in you. Uh, Doing like big publicity stuff for short films, I think is a bit like doesn't make any sense. Like making a Facebook for your film, maybe, but people building a complete website for a film, I always think is a bit waste of money. Usually you see, oh, our premiere is now, and after that, there's nothing new being posted on that website. So I think like just having the kind of the minimal stuff is enough. So yeah, so whenever we work with a film, this is kind of the basics that we collect. So the press kit has all the basic info in it. The synopsis, we always have synopsis, but also the biography in different lengths. One that's 50 words, one that's maximum 300 characters, one that's longer, a log line that's under 100 characters. Uh, all of this because I know that festivals will ask for it along the way. Our contact details, don't use your school email address, knowing that maybe after half a year that address doesn't exist anymore. So try to have something that's working. If you decide to make a Gmail address for the film, make sure that somebody's actually reading those emails. Then the stills, also in order of importance. So really think about what are good stills. Uh, Dialogue lists, so the subtitles of the film, all of this we have prepared early on. And when I talked about stills, stills are super important because as a short film, it's super difficult to stand out because you're being programmed in a program with 5 other films. Nobody talks about your film title. It's only like international competition 2 or student competition 3. So it's really difficult to get attention. But when you have a good still, what you see that happens is that people use your still to promote the whole program. So usually the short film competition has one still that could be your still. Uh, so, for instance, with Waking Up in Silence or Still, so the still of a short film was being used to promote the whole section where also feature films are playing because they like the still so much. So, having a good still is really good. Um, so, this is from a short film we worked with called Swatted, which is shot inside Grand Theft Auto. Part of the film is streamers, and the film deals with the phenomenon of swatting, where people do fake calls to the police so that the police breaks in during the live stream of a gamer. Um, so the still on the top left for you guys is, for instance, one of the stills that the director suggested, which is a screen grab from a Twitch stream. But I already saw all the festivals emailing back, hey, could we get a higher resolution still? So we knew like, okay, that's not working. Then the bottom left looks amazing when you see it on the big screen, but make it black and white and make it the size of the image in the catalog, then like nothing remains. So we said like, okay, these images we can't use. And then we went to the images on the other side, where we started noticing that festivals really were using them to promote again the whole program. So really try to have a good still. The still doesn't have to be a screen grab from your film. So it can also be like something that you shot on set. I mean, I don't want to talk about still photography on set because like even feature films usually don't even do that properly. But really try to think about like having a good still to promote your film. Um, yeah, maybe to go back one step, these dialogue lists. So this is you need this because a lot of festivals make their own subtitles. So in Spain, most festivals need Spanish subtitles, so they ask for your dialogue list to make Spanish subtitles. Um, always ask the festival, can I get those subtitles? So that can mean that suddenly you have Spanish subtitles, suddenly you have French subtitles, and that opens up other festivals that need those subtitles. So that's always good to do. Uh, so you really have to kind of think of these dialogue lists that people are making subtitles with this. So if your film is spoken in English and a different language, the dialogue list needs to include all spoken language and also all title cards, because otherwise those elements are not part of a translation that happens. So really make sure that you have everything, and also make sure that the dialogue list is correct with the film, that it's not the dialogue list of 2 versions ago, or like the version without the laurel of the festival in front of it, or so really the dialogue lists have to be correct to the final version of the film. Yeah, and then the screening copies. I mean, this is constantly changing a bit. So you already see that I crossed out DVDs some time ago. Um, we use Vimeo screeners for the features. We stopped using Vimeo because everybody can just download everything from it. So with the short films, we still use Vimeo. We have one Vimeo link that we try not to change the password of, that is downloadable. And that link I'm only sharing with festivals. Then we have a separate Vimeo screener for press. Then we have a separate Vimeo screener for people that ask me, hey, could I see this film? And for those 2 screeners, we constantly change the password. So you have one screener that kind of stays the same. And this is really with the idea of when I was programming, we would sometimes do a retrospective or like a thematic program, and I would dive into the database and pull out films that we maybe screened 3 years ago. And I always liked it when a film still had the same password. So it's really with that idea. Then having a trailer or excerpt for a short film, it's not necessary, but I always think it's good to have. Even like The one that you saw from Waking Up in Silence is just an excerpt from the film with the title card after it. Like it can be quite easy. And then the screening copies. DCP is the main copy that you have. So that's the copy that you have with the 5.1 sound, with everything as you want it to be. The ProRes, the H.264, we usually only have in stereo sound because most festivals are not able to play those files as 5.1 sound. So whenever I'm at a screening and I realize the sound is messed up, it's usually because somebody sent a 5.1 sound file that the festival is just not able to play. And often festivals have people working there who actually don't understand everything when it comes to projection. So like it's always good to ask. But DCP is like the main format. For every film, we usually have the English subtitled version and a clean version so that festivals can put their own subtitles on top of it. And then Blu-rays we have every now and then. It's also less and less. This is usually in the US that they ask it as a backup. But nowadays it's more that they just ask for an H.2 64 file. Yeah, where we're hardly sending anything around anymore. So a couple of years ago, I would have a tracking list of like 20 different hard disks going all over the world. Nowadays, that's not really the case anymore. So we have Dropbox, we have Google Drive and FileMail, and we have all our films on there. So even features like 120 gigabytes, we have on FileMail, and festivals just download it from there. If you have a short film, one free Google Drive account, you can probably already upload your DCP and screening files and everything on there. I like to have everything online so that even if I would get a selection now, I can just send them the DCP because it's online somewhere. The same with the stills and everything. Everything is in my Google Drive. I have links to it. So whenever somebody selects a film, I can just copy paste a link that I have somewhere and then they have access to all the stills. So you don't want to be like, whenever I send something over, we transfer, the festival forgets to download it, then suddenly you have to upload it while you don't have it anymore. So I really try to just have everything online for the festivals to get. Yeah, and then the next thing is just to submit. As I said, be prepared to get a lot of rejection. I think probably this is one of the main things that's good to work with a distributor because I just send you the selections and I don't send you the rejections. So it feels that your film is just doing well. I did this talk a couple of years ago at in Trieste together with a director, and I made this joke, and it was the first time he realized that his film was rejected like 200 times because he only got the selections that we got with the film. But yeah, it's like you really have to be mentally prepared for it. Like for me, it's easy because it's not my film. So like I feel shitty when a film doesn't get selected in a festival that I was hoping for. But in the end, it's not something I spent like a couple of years making. So it's definitely a different experience for me to submit a film as opposed to you. But that's why I really like encourage you to at least make a list of like 30 to 50 festivals, stick through that, because otherwise you like if you do 10 submissions and you get no to 10 submissions, you can't really say like, oh, people didn't like the film because it's just too little submissions that you did. So you really have to stick through it a little bit. I have a friend, like a Dutch filmmaker, that I got to know because his films would get into a lot of festivals, but all festivals that I had never heard of. But he never did a film education. He just did like these 48-hour film projects and started making short films. And he kind of had to buy his way into the film fund in the way of like they didn't want to take him serious. So he just spent like loads of money submitting his film everywhere and just racking up selections. So every now and then I would see on like a Dutch newspaper website, Dutch short film selected in New York, blah, blah, blah festival. And I was like, I never heard of this festival. I never heard of this filmmaker, this film. And then I would see like, oh, it's again a film from him. So it's really, he just he had the strategy where he would just submit a lot. He would usually spend like around 2,000 euros, I think. And then, oh, he would win like 200 euros there. He would win 100 euros there. Somebody would pay him 50 euros screening fee. And so it always kind of like almost balanced out with the cost that he was putting in. But he has like completely different approach from me. He was just submitting, he would quite quickly stop submitting to the biggest festivals because he knew that he always got selected in the smaller festivals where also there's also like a really dedicated audience in the end for his films. Um, yeah, and so when you start doing this, read the regulations. That's also a good thing to say. Um, I also have to say that we're not doing it anymore that well, but there's a lot of hidden rules in there. Sometimes a film festival just gets the rights to your film. They can put it online whenever they want. Sometimes they only want very specific films. Sometimes they need subtitles in a language that you don't have. So really make sure that you read it because otherwise you're just wasting money. I was recently submitting to a genre festival where they have in the regulations if your film is not a genre film and you submit, then we will never look at any films from you again. So I think they really have the experience that they get sent a lot of films that are not even genre films. Uh, so yeah, so really just read the regulations because otherwise you're just wasting um, your money. I think what's also a good thing with this is like I would always encourage to collaborate. Like making this festival list is a lot of work. So if you just say like, okay, with the students from our year, or maybe over the years that the school is collecting this, just like what are the festivals that are interesting, what were people positive about, where did we submit, so that not everybody has to reinvent the wheel, but you can kind of continue on what uh, people did before you. So yeah, the submission platform. So nowadays, oh yeah, there's a question. The other side, I think. No, is
Oh,
it good?
oh,
Yeah. Sorry.
oh, okay. Hi. I have a question about actually a few slides back about the laurels and the video links. When you get another laurel, do you definitely change the Vimeo link and like update it or just leave it as it is?
Yeah. What I usually do is that we update the still.
Oh, the
So
still. Okay. Yeah.
with all of Vimeo links, we have a still of the image, and there we put the laurels in. Um, and but we only make the screening copy different once, and that's when we get the first premiere festival.
Yeah.
That's sometimes that we put the
And
laurel
then,
in,
okay, and
and
then
then we
change
leave
it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Other questions?
And
Yeah.
the poster as well?
Yeah, so again, same. Poster is a bit easier because like almost we almost never print the poster for the short films nowadays, so it's just a digital thing. So I mean it depends a bit. Sometimes we work with a team who's just like doesn't really care, so they make the poster once and that's it. And sometimes we have a team that keeps updating the poster and sending me new links. And so yeah, it's just a bit up to you. I think from my experience, whenever I would get a film with a lot of laurels on it, usually it meant that the film wasn't that good. I have the feeling that like people who are a bit more selective and just have like one or two laurels on it, like that's fine. For me, it's also when I read a biography, if I see like three festivals that I know, it means just as much than when somebody says 60 festivals and I've never heard of the film, you know? So it's a bit, I think like just having a couple of good ones is just works just as well. I think it's maybe a bit different if, again, if you talk about feature films, then you have to draw an audience, but with a short film, it doesn't that much. Yeah.
I have another question. How do you approach the festivals? Like, if you submit the movies, do you approach differently, or what are the hacks?
So I think this is like also a little bit of a myth around festival, like people who submit to festivals that we have like all these connections and stuff. I actually don't talk to festivals too much. Like I just submit. Like for me, it's really like the film has to do the talking. So I just look at the deadline. Maybe I get in touch like, hey, could we get a waiver? And then I just submit the films. Sometimes if I know that a director says like, oh, I'm in love with this festival, I always want to go there. Then sometimes I send a message to the festival just saying like, hey, I just want to make you aware of this film. But actually, besides that, we hardly do like, I just don't think it makes sense. Like, again, from my experience as a programmer, the people that would email me are usually not the films that I found interesting. Like I would just like I am looking at what we get in, I'm scouting at festivals, but I would just watch the films. And it's the same if somebody sends me a film. Don't really care from who it is. Like I recently got a film from somebody who did a bunch of features. He had a film in Cannes. I saw the film, I didn't like the film, so yeah, then I don't work with the film. So like for me, it doesn't really matter that much. But so with the festivals, only for the A-list festivals, I'm actively pitching films. So I'm like, hey, Berlin, we're sending you these 5 films, but these 2 films I think are for you. Or like in Cannes, for instance, they are watching in the cinema sometimes together, and sometimes I'm like, okay, these 2 you have to see on the big screen. So try to watch this with the selection committee meeting. Or like now we had one film that has been in the making for like a year that it was pitching at some places. So then I'm also already talking to festivals like, okay, it's coming up. Or we had a film that we could submit to a festival, but we were more interested in a festival that would happen a couple of months later. So then I was already lobbying with that other festival where we got an early selection from. So for short films, I purely do it for the A-list festivals. For the rest, I really believe that the film does the talking. Um, I did a talk yesterday for a film school in Chicago, and it's funny because I got the same question, and I think that in the US it's different. So back in the day when Without a Box was still there as a submission platform, I think maybe it's still possible on Film Freeway. You can add a cover letter, so you can add like kind of a small personal message. And I really hear programmers saying, oh, it really helps to do that. I did a panel in Rotterdam with European festivals, and some festivals said it actively works against you if you send me an email. It's also a bit arrogant to say, but I think it's like it's a little bit like if I haven't met you before, if you haven't been at the festival before, like you can send me an email, but like I will be watching your film, so it doesn't really change much about it. So I think like if you want to email festivals, it's possible, but you just have to do a good message. Like, oh, I've always wanted to be at Fabio Festival because I have good, like, my parents used to go there when I was younger, blah, 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 or something like that. Or, but like sometimes I get an email and you almost see the like copy paste name of distributor here. But as soon as somebody writes me like, okay, here's my film, I would love to work with you because I love these films that you worked with, and I think this film is similar to that, then I'm prioritizing watching that film because I know that they understand like kind of what I'm doing. So I'm not doing it because we have too many films and I just don't think it matters. But that's also from a slightly privileged position because people know Square Eyes. So I already have the foot in the door when I submit my film and it has the Square Eyes logo on it. Yeah, that.
What are the events where you mingle with the A-list programmers?
With short film festivals, they're actually everywhere. So so for instance, for Locarno Film Festival, the one of the main programmers works at Dresden Film Festival, which is a regular short film festival in Germany. So if you play at her festival, you already have a connection to Dresden, to Locarno. For Cannes, now, for instance, for Critics Week, it's some people who are writing for a lot of smaller publications. They travel quite a lot. From Berlinale, most of the team travels to short film festivals. So I think with feature films, it's very unapproachable in some ways that like, okay, the programmers for the big festivals, they know that people want to talk to them. But with short film festivals, I mean, where do you meet them? Just go to the cocktail at any film festival. Like, I mean, short film programmers in the big festivals also don't get paid properly. So all of them are looking for free drinks. So it's really I think just traveling to short film festivals, you will meet the people quite easily. So that's also why I always encourage go to the cocktails, because I met all the people there because I'm just at those because I was just in those spaces. Yeah.
One more question from Baltic Film and Media School. How is your, if you can just briefly like explain, it's very admirable, all this Excel file and everything. How is your business model? How you can afford to go to different festivals, to cocktail parties, to send it, to keep your office up and so on? Just like few
Yeah.
it is like, because it's short films and it's like where's the
Yeah.
where's the trick actually?
So with the short films we get paid, but we charge relatively low. So we charge really, to break it down, we charge 200 euros for the festival strategy, we charge 6 euros per festival submission, and then we charge all the entry fees, but we calculate that we get 70% weight. So it comes down to, for 18 months of work, usually it's around 1,500 to 2,000 euros that people pay us, and that just covers kind of the expenses, I would say. And then we take a percentage from screening fees, 40%. And then after the film has won more than 5,000 euro, we take a small part of the award money as well. With some films that we work with where there's zero budget, we say, okay, this is what it would cost. We just start working, and as soon as you win something, you start paying us. The idea that we work with very few films is not the best business model, because if we would work with a lot of films, then we had much more income. So now it's always a gamble. So we take on a film, and then we hope that that film becomes successful and that we earn money with it. So in the past years, like the film that I mentioned that was so successful, that had 350 festivals, was in the same year that we worked with this Estonian film Sierra from Sanderjoon, which also did 250 festivals. So then you have two films that for me almost earn as much as we earn with feature films. So it's really, our business model works because I think I'm quite good at picking films that will be successful. But also because we keep our costs very low. So I don't travel to festivals if I have to pay to go there. So nowadays I travel not so much. I mainly travel for the features. I don't buy a stand that costs me 10,000 euros in Cannes because I don't have those types of films. So we just keep our costs very low. Yeah, that we don't have a car. Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay, so the submission platforms. Yeah, so these are kind of like some of the platforms. I think most of you will probably know them. Film Freeway is the big one. Most of the big festivals are on it. You can't really get around it. It's called Film Freeway, but there's not much free about it nowadays. Short Film Depot is the biggest one in Europe. It started by Clermont-Ferrand Film Festival. It has around, let's say, 100, 150 festivals on it. We submit to around 50 of those festivals each year. So that means that the quality is much stronger than compared to Film Freeway. Film Fest Platform, Fest Home are really for the French market and the Spanish market. A lot of those festivals will need French or Spanish subtitles, but those platforms are really good. Movie Beta, Click for Festivals are really small ones. And then the other ones that are on there all went bankrupt when Film Freeway started popping up. Yeah, and then the next part is the fun part. It's getting selected. Yeah, that's the good part. There's not, like, I could go into like the whole selection process of festivals, maybe not super useful, but what's good to know is that as a professional, when I go to festivals, I'm looking at the competition programs. So the competition programs is really where I know that the festival is programming kind of the films that they think reflect the festival identity as best as possible. and are kind of the most recent films. So for me, that's the interesting part. As a filmmaker, it's interesting because professionals will be watching those films. So when I was programming, I would always make sure that I watch the complete competition when I'm at a festival. I'm not looking at any of the side programs. That's just for my own personal interest, but it's not really for my work. So in the competition as a filmmaker, I know that I can win a prize. I know that I get attention. Usually you get invited with a hotel or travel. You usually don't get that when you're in a side program. So because of that, a festival says we don't pay money if you're in competition. All of this falls away when you're out of competition. So when we're playing out of competition, we always ask for money. We don't always get money, but we do always ask for it. So with a short film, it's between 100 and 200 euros that we ask. It's between 50 and 100 euros usually that we get. So especially if you have a film that plays quite a bit, you can kind of earn back the cost that you're putting into it. Again, to make a comparison with a feature film, if you're in competition and you have like a good debut film, you will get between 500 to 1,000 euros. So even in competition. So if you have a film that plays at a lot of festivals, you can earn quite a bit of money with screening. So that's why sales agents do the festivals as well with features. But yeah, so always when you're playing out of competition, always ask for a screening fee. A lot of directors have this feeling that you have to be grateful to the festival that they selected your film, and maybe they don't like you when you ask for it. In the end, they need your film to be a film festival, so always ask for it. Most festivals have this kind of don't ask, don't tell type of policy where they never offer a screening fee, and then you ask, and then suddenly there is a screening fee. So always try to ask for it, especially nowadays when you have to pay entry fees, then the festival also has to be able to pay a screening fee. I even had film directors with features that started asking money to go to the festival. They were like, I'm not able to work on my next project if I go to your festival, so you have to pay me to come. Maybe I won't recommend that too much, but like it was a film where you really wanted to have the director there, so it actually happened quite a few times. Yeah, so getting the rejection doesn't mean that the festival didn't like your film. So there's a lot that comes into play when you're making a selection. So for instance, with the festival that I worked with for our student competition, we had 5 programs of 70 minutes. So we would have a short list of around 100 films, and then we started discussing that short list from 100 to bring it down to those 5 programs. So that's around 20 films. So then it's stuff like, okay, how many films from do we have from each country? Maybe we want to try to get some more films from this country, but we want to have a balance. How many animations do we have? How many fiction? How many documentary? How many films around a certain topic? In the end, what has become more and more important over the past years is also what is the balance between the people who are making the film. So what country are they coming from? Male, female directors. In some countries, they are also looking at the education level, for instance. All these things come into play. But this is really something that only comes into play at the moment you're making the final program. So making that long list is just purely about what are films that we could program in a festival, and only when you make that final selection do you start looking at that. And then it also comes down to that we had a selection team of 5 people and we all had to agree on it. So that sometimes meant that films, if you like, my taste is a bit more edgy than some of the other people. So that meant that from my top 10, only 2 films ended up in the selection. But I was also head of programming. So that would mean that every film that I liked, I would just keep in mind. And every year that we have a special program, I would just be putting in films that I liked from previous years. So getting a no sometimes means that 3 years later, suddenly that festival emails you and asks for your film in a special program. So the rejection doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't like your film. Some festivals, some of the big festivals also send you that you were shortlisted. I never really know what I feel about this. That Cannes tells you, oh, you were very close to being selected, but the bottom line is that you're not in Cannes. I sometimes wonder, like, should I even tell the director? Because it's only frustrating. Like, I had one director who got this message from Cannes, and even the programmer said to him multiple times, oh, I really regretted that we didn't program your film. The bottom line is that he never played in Cannes. So it's really like, I had one director who asked me if he should put on his biography that he was pre-selected at Cannes, which I said maybe don't do that. Yeah, selected. Yeah. So then the next thing is when you get selected, make sure to go to festivals. Of course, you just want to see how people react to your film. You want to be there to do the Q&As and everything. But also, that's the moment, as I said before, where you're able to meet programmers from other festivals. You're able to meet other directors. You're able to see other films. So a lot of directors that I worked with, that I, for instance, worked with early student films of theirs that were successful, that changed how they made their graduation film because suddenly they got a better understanding of other short films, but they also built a lot of connections, so they could really use those connections kind of to make their next project better. And a lot of them also build like a network of filmmakers around them that they are still sharing their scripts with and things like this. So back in the day, you had a festival called Henri Langlois in France, which is now Poitiers Film Festival. It's a student festival, which is in like, I think I've never been there, but it's in a very small city somewhere, which means that all the directors that are there hang out together. And all my directors that have been there kind of leave with like a network of like the most successful student directors of that year that they are still in touch with. So I can't recommend going to festivals enough. And as I said, even if you're not into partying, even if you're not into drinking, make sure that you go to the cocktails and the parties because everybody will be there. So always try to have slightly a game plan when you go to a festival. Try to see who's going to be there. If you see, oh, the programmer of this festival in the Netherlands will be there and I would love to go to that festival and I just submitted, make sure that you try to just go up to that person and say like, hey, I have a film in this festival. I just submitted to your festival. That's it. Like for me, it's really, I mean, it's also the thing maybe that I hate that I meet people at film festivals that I fall in love with, that I have like super nice time with, but then I haven't seen their film yet. And then you're just like, oh, please let this person have made a good film. But it's really, we've had films that we liked, and in the discussion, we were pushing for it more because we know this is a director I would like to invite to come to our festival because it will be a person that maybe is super generous in the Q&As. Maybe it's just a person that you know will be nice to the other guests that are there. Maybe it's just a director that you know is super talented. So all of this is really things that we learn from meeting people in festivals. And when I'm traveling, like nowadays, because I'm only watching films that I'm considering are only new films that haven't really premiered yet. So when I go to a short film festival, to be honest, I'm not watching films because it's not really useful for me because I won't be able to consider them. And most of the time, I'm also kind of overloaded with films that I have to watch in my hotel room. So I'm not watching so much. So I'm really in festivals to meet people. And then maybe I watch the films afterwards. But like my thing is like I just try to meet the people that are around. So really make use um, of that in festivals. Yeah, then going online, this is a thing I don't really know how much sense this still makes to have in here. This was more from the period when you would like do a year of festivals, year and a half, and then you would go on Vimeo online. Nowadays, after the pandemic, a lot of festivals have an online part, so it's not completely the same. Still, with most of our films, we really try to build in 1 year at least to go to festivals. So, for instance, a couple of years ago, we worked with this short film called Neighbor Abdi, It's a Dutch documentary. We premiered it in Locarno also. We sold it to the New York Times before we had the world premiere. And the New York Times puts the film online worldwide for free. But what we did is we sold it before we even premiered it, but we said we want to have 1 year. So we already could block it off. We knew like, okay, we have this sale. They would give us 1 year to go to festivals and then they would go online. So we really always try to create this window, uh, yeah, before going online. If you do something online with festivals, always try for the festival to block it to the country. Like don't have them put your film online worldwide. We always try to argue against this. Sometimes it also doesn't matter that much because then you hear like, okay, usually 20 people watch the film. So yeah, then it also doesn't really matter if it's online worldwide or not. Yeah. But yeah, all of this kind of leads to the most important thing, and that's making your next film. I think my biggest advice with all of this strategy is that you shouldn't stress out too much about it. I know people that had like one of the most successful films in a year and they made literally every mistake possible. But it doesn't stop the film from playing in festivals. And with short films, you can't do that much wrong. Like maybe you miss out on a premiere. We had a film that we premiered at a smaller festival and then the head of Berlinale Shorts came to us and was angry at me and was like, why didn't you show me this film? And then with the next film, we premiered at Berlinale Shorts. So it's really, in the end, if you miss out on something, it only means that the festival will look out for your next project. Uh, and with features, it's much more like mistakes can really cause an issue for your film circulation. But with a short film, like all of it can kind of help you. You can play at like a super random festival, but maybe the next producer you're going to work with is there. Or suddenly there's a very important person in the jury that then recommends it somewhere. Like we've been at festivals where we just had these random connections, or we played at a small festival, first edition, but that festival decided to sell part of their festival program to the Criterion Collection. So suddenly we had a deal of 2,000 euros because we played at this festival and they just liked the film. So I think with short films, you shouldn't like when I'm talking about these premieres, in the end, every film has to play at one festival for the first time. But actually, when I talk about a film that plays at like 70 festival, it means that one of those festivals needed a premiere and 69 of those festivals didn't care. So don't stress out too much. And it can always be that your next film is then the film where you get that big festival with because the festival felt that they missed out on your previous one. Um, and always like use your contacts that you made along the way for your next project. That. Um, Questions? Thank you.
Hi. Okay. I would like to ask you, do I understand it correctly that you can submit for the first year to the A festivals, and if it doesn't get selected, or let's say it gets selected at the end, you still have 2 more years, even though 1 year is past, right? You still have 2 more years to
Yeah,
write.
so the world premiere is the moment I say the film is finished. So if you start submitting for 1 year and then you get selected a year later, then I just say now is the moment that the film is finished and it becomes a 2026 film. So like don't then leave like the copyright on 2024 blah 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 on it. But yeah, the only thing is sometimes you have like a requirement from the funding or there's a national festival you can't get around. We have it, for instance, with I work a lot with film students from Frenois, a film school in France. The school doesn't allow you to change the year of production. So they say you're a 2025 graduation year, so your film is a 2025 film. So we had a film that premiered at Berlinale but they said, no, you can't make it a February 25 film. It's a 24 film. Sometimes we have a funding that says all the films we made within this funding have to premiere at the national festival. So that means that from that moment on, the clock kind of starts ticking. So then you don't have this thing. So we had a film, for instance, it was like the perfect film for Berlinale generation, but we were made in that funding. So we premiered in the Netherlands Film Festival in October. And then we just started immediately talking with Berlin. And we said, okay, we're going to keep the international premiere till February. But then after that, we're immediately going to send it everywhere else because we don't want to then wait for Cannes and then get a no from Cannes. And then you're 7 months later and you don't have any festival besides the premiere. So if you have like this requirement, you kind of change your strategy a bit about that around that, and then you can change your year. Like we've had films where we kind of cheated, sometimes changed the title, made a re-edit, but I really try not to do that. Yeah, yeah.
And one more question, if I can. You see so many short films, so I'm wondering, I know this is kind of stupid, but do you have any advice for people who are going to make their graduation films? Like, what's the trend now in festival world? Thank you.
Yeah, so the trend thing I always think is a bit like there's topics that are important, and you see that back in the films. I don't really believe that festivals are selecting a certain trend. A lot of people are like, festivals only play dramas. I think that's usually because it's so difficult to make a comedy. But I think if you make a comedy that works on an international level, your film will be everywhere. I think the biggest thing is to be super critical of the length of your film. Every short film is too long. It's almost like really a opinion that most programmers have. So really always be really critical about that. But also like it has a consequence. So if you have a film that's 30 minutes, you can already cut the amount of selections in half compared to if you would have a film of 10 minutes. Just because like what I mentioned, we had like 5 programs of 70 minutes. So putting in a 30-minute film means that we can't put in two 15-minute films. So and also a 30-minute film means that you have to build a program around that one film. So I think the length is for me probably the thing that I would say really be very critical of that and see if it's possible to make it shorter. We had a film that was 28 minutes. It was the perfect film for Berlinale generation. They select maximum 20 minutes. So then the team decided, okay, we're going to re-edit the film. And then they realized it's not possible. Like it's a different film if we cut it down. So they decided, okay, this is just what it is, and we have to work with it. Then it won the student Oscar, so it still did okay. But yeah, so like the length I think is the biggest thing. Besides that, I don't really believe in like certain teams are now more hip than others. I mean, certain teams also mean that it's not possible to play in certain countries. All of these things. Yeah. Yeah.
Now my question is based on a rumor I've heard a lot. Uh, do certain countries expect certain quality of films from certain countries?
Can you give an example, or like I kind of have an answer, but if
I mean, is there that national prejudice based on the um, national cinematography of the
mm,
filmmaker?
I mean, for instance, France has a super good production climate for short films because there's a lot of money. So the quality is super high. So for me to work with a French film, I'm much more critical than for other countries because I know the competition is much higher. So at the festival, we always had like a list of 20 French films we could choose from, but we only wanted to take maximum 3. So because of that, it's more competitive. So yes, I think that's the case. And then what also happened is that for some countries where we wouldn't see a lot of films coming from, we would be more um, we would maybe select a film that would be a bit rougher around the edges, just because otherwise it would mean that we wouldn't have any films to consider from that country. So you try to sometimes you're a bit more you have a bit less high not expectation, but like you're less demanding from some certain countries because you know what the reality is of those countries. Then also you have that there's certain expectations from certain countries. So for instance, I have often discussions with Iranian directors. Like if you look at what plays in festivals from coming from Iran, it's always the same type of topics, but like a very light comedy, you won't really quickly see playing because people are like, that's not what we want to see from Iran. So there's these prejudices of like what people expect to come from a certain country. Um, but besides that, I don't really have that feeling. Like it's just like if a country is very strong, that will kind of work.
Yes,
in that sense.
that's why I asked because what you said. And my question is there a certain way that we can change that, or it's not dependent on filmmaking?
No, I mean, if it's a good film, it's a good film. Like, I really think you will stick out. I don't think you can change much about that. Yeah, it's just, you know that you're competing with like a lot of other probably good films. While probably like from this country, there's maybe one film that's in all the festival each year, while from France, there's maybe like 10 films that are around. Like it's really same with Austria, same with the Netherlands. Like yeah, it's just kind of what it is. But I mean, it's a luxury position because it also means that there's a lot of money then to make a film. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions?
We have one from the live stream.
Okay.
So from Petra, hi, I wanted to ask. I heard something about Al Jazeera and you talked about New York Times. Are there the distribution possibilities like those for short documentaries and how to get there?
Yes. So Al Jazeera is one, New York Times is one, the New Yorker used to be one, but they do a bit less. Arte buys a little bit of short documentaries, not that much. These people are around. For me, I actually met a bunch of them in Doc Leipzig because there's a pitching specifically for short films, short and sweet, where, for instance, the New York Times was, where Arte was, where some of the festivals was. So that was a place. But it's kind of similar to what I said before, that these people are in festivals, maybe more in documentary specific festivals. Um, I mean, you have Al Jazeera Balkans, for instance, where they're also scouting at a festival. But if you have a short documentary and you really want to kind of be able to find those people, then I think a festival like Doc Leipzig, like ITVA, are the places where you're able to find those people. I think probably you can also email them. I don't know if it's very easy to find the contact details of these type of people. And they're also scouting actively. So for instance, we um, are now again in talks with the New York Times because they saw a film that we had in South by Southwest and then they just contacted us. So they're also scouting themselves.
Everything? Okay, I'm not gonna wait to make you wait any longer to enjoy your evening. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our guest for bringing this beautiful and amazing presentation to you. And we hope you will get something from it. So nice evening.
Thanks, guys.